Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis with Forbes Breaking News. Joining me now is former Congressman Charlie Dent. Congressman, thank you so much for joining me.
Hey, thank you, Britt, to be with you.
You are part of a new group called Our Republican Legacy. This consists of former Republican lawmakers just like yourself who are, quote, deeply concerned about the future of our country. So can you talk about first what inspired the creation of the group?
Yeah, former U.S. Senators Jack Danforth, Alan Simpson, and Bill Cohen recently released an op-ed to the Washington Post talking about, what I think many of us who are what I will call dispirited Republicans who want a different direction for the party. We believe it's important to create an alternative argument or an alternative narrative to MAGA. And we believe that we can maybe frame this argument around five core principles. One being the Constitution, the rule of law, accepting election outcomes, peaceful transfer of power. So all these things, what I would argue under the Constitution. Two, the Union. Our party, we were founded largely by Abraham Lincoln, and we were about keeping this country together. We're not about necessarily this divisive politics that speaks to kind of an ugliness that really does separate people. So the union is another key principle that we're talking about. Fiscal discipline, fiscal responsibility, talking about things that have to be discussed, about the fiscal trajectory of the country being unsustainable. We're not afraid of that. We think we need to do that. And of course, we're going to defend free enterprise. We're against these I'll say, mindless tariffs that really run counter to opening markets for American producers. And we think this is wrong, and we're very much opposed to where MAGA is headed on that issue. We don't like price controls and excessive subsidies. So we come from a different point of view. Also, we believe in a strong national defense, peace through strength. We think that it's important to oppose aggressive autocrats like Vladimir Putin. We think it's important to embrace our allies and that we can advance America's national interests through strong relations with key partners and allies that serve as force multipliers. Again, that's another area where we would contrast strongly with the MAGA movement that talks in often isolationist or very unilateralist terms. So bottom line is, we think it's time to present that argument. Silence is not an alternative narrative. And so we're going to provide it, and we think it's past time. We're looking not just at this coming election, but we're looking beyond the election. We are basically welcoming all Republicans who want to join this movement. We are pretty much we accept diversity of opinion on social issues, but we just want to get people in and come up with this. We think that we strongly believe that the Republican Party has been around, for 170 years. Those principles I just outlined have sustained us, and those roots are deep. The MAGA movement is maybe 7 to 10 years old now. And their roots are rather shallow, and frankly, I don't think they're particularly sustainable. So I think it's time to have this argument, and we're inviting people to join us at ourrepublicanlegacy.com. Go to the website.
How do you think your party moved away from these principles? Because like you said, A, you're against the MAGA movement. B, it is fairly young. Donald Trump announced his presidency or his run for presidency back in 2015. Do you think Donald Trump is to blame here? Is he the cause and effect? What does that look like?
Well, my own personal opinion is that Donald Trump is probably less of a cause and maybe more of a consequence of what has happened. There's already a bit of a fire burning, and he's more or less like an accelerant, gasoline on the fire. The issue really isn't, to me, whether who's most responsible. Clearly, he is driving this party, in my view, in a very dangerous direction, and the party has seen nothing but defeat since he first won in 2016. We've seen Republicans lose the House. We saw them lose the Senate and the presidency in 2020. We saw them, again, significantly underperform in 2022. And who knows what's going to happen in this election. I'm not in the business of making predictions. But we have 2/3 of the American public who think, one of the candidates, Joe Biden, is too old, and the other, Donald Trump, is too erratic. And voters are pretty disgusted. And I think it's time for Republicans like myself and Senators Danforth, Cohen, and others, Simpson, John Boehner, Dan Quayle have joined our movement. We're trying to get some people to rally around these principles and start, thinking about a way to rebuild the party. We know we're on the outs right now. We know that we are, the party's divided. It's not evenly divided, but it is divided nonetheless. And we realize we might represent a minority view right now. but we do think our view is sustainable for the long term.
You want to move away from the MAGA movement, so do the other former lawmakers in our Republican legacy. But Donald Trump is the likely Republican nominee in 2024. And as you mentioned, Senators John Danforth, William Cohen, and Alan Simpson posed this question for the Washington Post. Between Trump and Biden, what should real Republicans do? What do you think the answer is there?
Well, we're not in the business of telling any voters, Republicans, how to vote in this election. I suspect some of our people will not be voting for either candidate. Some might vote for Biden. Some may vote for Trump, for all I know. But we're not trying to give advice about how to vote in this election. What we are talking about is building a movement, thinking about this, beyond 2024. Right now, the Republican Party is being led by a man who's now been convicted of a felony. We can argue whether or not this was a great case or not, but nevertheless, he is a felon. He's the top of the ticket. He's going to have to talk to a probation officer, and I think the party has to think really long and hard about what it wants to present to the American people going forward. Again, we think the issues are big. They are not being addressed, but our party, in so many ways, from Lincoln to Theodore Roosevelt, to Eisenhower, to I'll take you right up to Nixon, Ford, Reagan, and the Bushes, I think represented something, and McCain and Romney too, all represented something that I think is very deep and meaningful, and many Americans want to embrace these types of principles I outlined, not just Republicans, but a lot of Democrats and independents too. We can grow this party, but it's hard to grow it when the party right now, the MAGA movement, is talking about exclusion, keeping people out, keeping them away. And I think that is a problem. We've witnessed too that, Nikki Haley is still in my state of Pennsylvania last month, or at the end of April. She got about nearly 20% of the vote in a closed primary. She wasn't even on the She wasn't even running at that point. We've seen similar numbers in other states. There are a lot of Republicans looking for somewhere else to go. There are many people who are voting for Donald Trump who aren't happy about it but want somewhere else to go. So we're trying to speak to these people in a way that I think can resonate, and it maybe can resonate for the long term.
If you're looking at Republicans from the past, which Republican president, in your opinion, is your North Star when it comes to our Republican legacy, who best held up these tenets?
Well, when it came to the Union and the Constitution, Abraham Lincoln, number one. And number two, when it comes to constructive foreign policy and peace through strength, Dwight Eisenhower. I put him right at the top of the list. When it comes to regenerating an economy and talking about many matters of the fiscal issues, I have to give Ronald Reagan a lot of credit. Granted, the deficits are higher than they should have been then, but he at least got this country moving and out of a bit of an economic stagnation. So we can talk about him. George H.W. Bush, another one who was, in my view, underrated for his enormous foreign policy achievements, overseeing the dissolution of the Soviet Union without a shot being fired or anybody being killed. I mean, George H.W. Bush really was quite the master. So we have a lot of folks here in this party that I think have served us well. But I would probably just go down that list I said: Lincoln, Eisenhower, Reagan, and H.W.
When you're looking today at the modern Republican Party, like you said, it is divided between the MAGA movement and something different. Who do you think today, when you're looking at the House and the Senate, is a modern North Star of who you look toward as the type of Republican that you want this group to elect?
Well, I don't want to get any of my former colleagues in trouble by saying kind things about them, but I want them to survive in this environment. Granted, they're up against it with MAGA, but you have some great leaders. Senator Todd Young, for example. He's a real leading light in so many ways, and they want to do the right things. There are many members of the House. I could, look at the Mike McCalls and the Mike Turners and the Brian Fitzpatricks and others, who truly really want this, country to move forward. They want us to be a responsible player on the international stage. There are plenty of people out there. Whether how freely they can talk right now is another matter. These folks, they need help. They need cover. They need those of us to speak up. We saw the fight over Ukraine funding, where so many Republicans truly wanted to support an ally, and were being thwarted by members of the MAGA movement who didn't have the votes. They never had the votes, And we're trying to prevent this sometimes this extreme tail, often driven by some of the most extreme elements of the MAGA movement. They're trying to drive outcomes when they don't have the votes. And in fact, even on the Ukraine funding, even though more Republicans voted against the funding bill than voted for it, we know there were a strong majority who supported that bill, even though they might not have all voted for it. But we need to help give them cover, help them find their voices, so they can actually drive. Right now, it's a lot of former members, who've been around, and I think who maybe have the respect of many of the current members. And we're just trying to let them know that we're here to support them, and it's we're going to have to deal with this issue for the longer term, and it's not just about 2024.
To your point, it's not just about 2024. Your group is looking into the future, and you've said before you haven't voted for Trump before. You're not planning to vote for him again. Would you prefer President Biden win re-election so the GOP has more of a time to reset, maybe move away from this MAGA movement?
Well, yeah, I said clearly I didn't vote for Donald Trump in 2016 or 2020. I voted for Biden in 2020. This election, I'm going to keep my powder dry. I'm not going to vote for Donald Trump, but I just want voters to think hard about what they're doing. Look, if Donald Trump is elected again, he said what he's going to do. He's going to set aside the Constitution for a period of time. He's going to, I think, move very aggressively with executive actions that would undermine the Article 1 powers of Congress, in my view. And so I think he's going to take us on a path that would be, again, chaotic, dangerous, unilateralist. I suspect many of our allies, particularly in Europe, will be scared to death. Ukraine is worried about being thrown under the Russian bus. So I do very much fear a second Trump presidency, but I'm not in the business of telling anybody how to vote in this coming election. I'm talking about the principles we need to sustain us beyond this election.
Let's say Donald Trump wins and he is neck and neck in the polls. What do you think the future of the GOP is?
Well, if the party, if Republicans win, let's game that out. Trump has said that he's going to, purge a lot of people in the federal government, set aside many civil service protections, populate his administration with people who are truly devoted to him. I suspect he will. He's not going to have the Jim Mattises of the world around, or the Gary Cohns and other McMaster and other adults to try to restrain his worst impulses. I fear that the people closest to the president will be those who are the most sycophantic and the ones who are the greatest grifters, who will basically validate a lot of his worst impulses. And so I do fear that. I think many of us do, that we could be back in for a round of chaos that could be worse than the first round, although they'll come in with a bit more experience. But I do worry about much of the day-to-day chaos that we witnessed in the previous Trump administration.
As we sit here today, we're less than 5 months out from the November election. Between now and then, what is our Republican legacy doing?
Right now, we just got started. We just launched, we've just set up a web page. We are trying to get people to join our cause. As I mentioned, we have a number of former members of Congress and other elected officials. I mentioned a few of them, including Dan Quayle and John Boehner and Susan Molinari. I could go down a long list of people, Senator Mark Kirk. There are plenty. But we're trying to build this movement, not just to elected officials, but to a lot of other, not just elected officials around the country, but ordinary Republicans who want this movement. We are going to try to provide a platform for people to go to build arguments, to gather. And there are other organizations out there, to be fair, that are also trying to do things to be helpful. But we need to rally, and I think with the marquee group of names that we have assembled, we can do a bit more. So right now, we are just trying to build a ground game, if you will, and also just show people the arguments and let them know that they're not alone. Because I think a lot of Republicans kind of feel, like I said, very dispirited and kind of adrift, and don't feel like they have a place where they belong. They're not really Democrats. They don't want to become independents. They want to keep their party. They want to stay in their party, and they want their party to be something better. And I'm not talking about necessarily going back to where we were, but those principles I outlined are principles that carried us for 170 years. They can carry us forward again. I get it that some of the issues may change a bit, And we have to think about this new world order that's emerging, multipolar world, and think about some things a bit differently maybe than we have historically. But nevertheless, we should be guided by principles, not about fealty to one man who can be rather quixotic, who has rather unfixed positions, and they shift constantly. We think we have to be guided by something greater and more enduring than that.
Trump, as I said, is running for the White House, and him as well as his movements are the antithesis of what you're talking about. So this election, are you more concerned on local races, House races, Senate races, or just the entire ballot?
Our organization is not just about this election cycle. We are not a PAC or a super PAC. We're not involved in any particular election. We are about building a movement. That's what we want to do. There are plenty of other people out there, who are involved in the day-to-day races. That's not what we're about right now. We are about building these arguments, building momentum, and begin this effort. It will need it. We should not be about fealty to one man. The world, we know that. We're not talking about going back, but we are talking about using principles that got us this far to take us into the future with all the changes that are occurring at this rapid pace in this very much multipolar and disordered world.
Congressman Charlie Dent, I appreciate the time. Thank you so much for the conversation.
Thank you, Brittany. Great to be with you.